This is Thriving with DBT, a podcast where we learn and practice DBT skills to improve our lives. Today's episode is a one-on-one coaching conversation with Dr. Alicia Smart and a student from TheraHive's 22-week DBT skills program. These sessions create space to slow things down and deepen our understanding of a specific skill with an experienced DBT coach. And they'll also help you integrate the skills into your own life and recognize what real progress actually looks like and feels like in practice. Let's get into today's episode.
Hi, I'm Dr. Alicia Smart, co-founder and clinical chief officer at TheraHive. I am here with Edward again for week 3 this time for the emotional regulation module. And like previously, we will start with a little mindfulness. So if you are in a place where you can close your eyes, feel free to close your eyes for a second and start by noticing your breathing. You're going to bring awareness to your inhale and exhale. Just noticing the breath as it enters in through your nose and following the breath as it leaves your body. And today we're going to do a little bit of a different mindfulness. I'm actually going to have you open your eyes back up and we're going to look around the room or space that you're in and see if you can identify 5 things that you notice. So noticing 5 objects, and you can name them silently to yourself. And if you have already done that, you can return to your breath. Inhale and exhale. And then we're going to move to our sensation of touch. So noticing 4 things that you can feel in this moment. Could be your feet touching the floor, could be whatever you're sitting on, or the fabric of your clothing, but just noticing 4 things that you can touch. And again, once you've done that, returning to your breath. Inhale and exhale. And then we're going to bring our awareness to our sense of hearing. So noticing 3 things that you can hear in this moment. One might be the sound of my voice. If you have an AirPod in, you might put one out just to see if you can hear any other sounds in the environment. And then once you've done that again, you can return to your breath. And then we're going to move to our sense of smell. So seeing if you can notice 2 smells around you. If there's something nearby that you can pick up and smell, you're welcome to do that. Again, maybe on you or nearby. And again, returning to your breathing. And then lastly, our sense of taste. So if you have something to drink, you could take a sip. Or maybe a lingering taste you already have in your mouth from previously. And if not, if there's no taste around, then you can also just come back to your breath, maybe taking a deep breath in. And a slow exhale out. All right. So, hi, Edward. Thanks.
Hey, Dr. Alicia.
Yeah. What did you notice? What was that like for you?
It definitely, after the day I had today, which has been very chaotic from both a professional and personal, it was nice to just have a moment to center on my breath and center in my surroundings. It's so easy, as someone who works from home, to essentially get lost even in my own space or spaces. Like, I'm just like the opportunity just to look around, even in the room I'm sitting in right now, give me an opportunity to see what's on the walls, what's out the window, things that like I can get so like blinders on where I'm just like the environment around me could be anything and I'm not noticing anything. And being able to just the calming effect of what do you hear? What do you smell? What do you touch? What do you taste? Was like just centering my mind on something very specific as opposed to jumping between work meetings, personal things. Just having that opportunity just to focus on one thing. And I was just like, oh, yeah.
Yeah, I like
That's nice.
this is called a 5-4-3-2-1 mindfulness, and it's if you're listening, you may have heard of this one before, done this before. It's a common mindfulness practice, but I do find that this one, like the paying attention to our senses, can be really grounding as a way to get present, especially if we've been kind of scattered and in our head, as a way to kind of drop into our body, like, oh, like what's happening externally for a moment, and to be here in this moment. So great, thank you. So this week we had 2 skills that were covered. So last week, week 2, we covered check the facts. And these 2 skills, opposite action and problem solving, are part of the section of emotion regulation when we talk about potentially changing our emotion by either checking the facts or opposite action or problem solving, right? And so these 2 actually are nice. A nice follow-up to check the fact, because if we're trying to figure out what to do after we check the facts, if it doesn't fit the facts, our emotion doesn't fit the facts, then we might want to do opposite action. Or if it does fit the facts, we might want to do problem solving. So we'll get into what those 2 skills are and how to use them. And I'm excited to hear, Edward, your example of how you tried this out in your home practice, and to also answer questions that came up around opposite action. Maybe we'll start there. So just from a teaching moment, for those who don't know what opposite action is, the idea of opposite action is going opposite the emotion urge. So if you have an emotion, for example, fear or anxiety, and yet anxiety did not fit the facts, meaning there's no threat to you, right? There's no danger to your actual safety, and yet your body is responding as if there is, then we may want to do opposite action. And the thing about opposite action is when we go opposite to the emotion urge, eventually the emotion goes down. It may not happen right away, but the more we do it and we learn, oh, this isn't dangerous, this is actually okay, right? Then over time, that fear will go down. And this is actually the basis for all of exposure therapy. When we think about people overcoming a phobia, guess what? The treatment for getting over a phobia is to be exposed to the thing you're afraid of over and over again until you realize, oh, this is not dangerous, right? So if I'm afraid of flying, I might start by just imagining I'm getting on a plane, right? And then maybe I go to an airport but don't get on the plane. But eventually the goal is to be able to get on the plane and fly. And that would be opposite action to fear, right? When fear does not fit the facts. Now, we'll get back to when fear does fit the facts, and then we might want to do some problem solving. But that's in a nutshell what opposite action is. It's going opposite the emotional urge.
Yeah, and I found this week's lesson really helpful, especially when paired with, I think, as I mentioned in last week, I struggled a little bit with check the facts in its own isolation and just trying to understand how I can best apply it in day-to-day situations. But now that I have both like opposite action and I keep getting it wrong, and I'm going to refer back to the model to get it right. And problem solving, I keep trying to call it fixing, but problem solving. It really did, especially with the kind of like the flow diagram that was in the module, it was really helpful for me to just go, all right. I use check the facts works to understand is the facts of the situation meet the reality of the situation. Like you said, like I think a great example there was speaking publicly. If I'm going to check the facts, am I feeling scared about public speaking? Is it because I'm in danger, or I just don't like speaking in public? Mm-hmm. And then using like things like you mentioned, opposite action, where it's like, great, if you're afraid of speaking in public, speak in public. I know it sounds easier than it is to speak in public. And if it's a genuine fear, how do you then navigate? I know we're jumping ahead here, and I really found this module incredibly helpful. Mm-hmm. The pair last week's skill with this week's skill, especially with a lot of things I'm dealing with personally around, as we talked about, anxiety, anger, sadness. I was really appreciative last week when you pointed it out to me. Like, these are like opposite action in many ways is a great skill that I love learning this week, where it's like, yeah, when I'm feeling angry, anxious, or sad, I do want the opposite action many times. Because when I check the facts, there isn't a danger or fear or threat around it. It's really just surrounding that emotion is tied very deeply to how I feel about a situation, and in the past has influenced how I might have reacted negatively or heightened in a way that wasn't productive, wasn't helpful, and made the situation worse. So I love learning about opposite, and I really want to dig into a little bit about like problem solving, like when it is true, when it is factually grounded in it, and it isn't just an truly emotional based on what do you do about those certain circumstances.
Right.
Yeah,
To actually deal with the situation that's triggering the feeling in the first place. Like, how do you
yeah,
actually resolve it or change the situation? Yeah, absolutely. The sadness and I'm glad you brought up sadness and anger, because sometimes with those two emotions, they may fit the facts. And yet we still might want to do opposite action. So that's another thing I do want to say is that it's not like just that it doesn't fit the facts and so we want to do opposite action. Sometimes if we want to change the feeling because it's not effective, like maybe the emotion anger fit the facts in the sense that, like, yes, this is a frustrating situation, and yet me acting on anger is not going to be effective, then I may want to still do opposite action to anger. So if opposite action is all about changing the emotion, and so there are times when we still may choose to change the emotion through opposite action, but you have to want to change it. Like, it's not, don't do the opposite action unless, like, okay, like you have to acknowledge, okay, that I'm feeling this anger and it's not actually going to get me what I want, so I'm going to go opposite action to it. It's going to be, more effective.
no, and I appreciate it. And I think that was a great reminder in this week's lesson was that hey, if you're going to do it all the way. Don't do it halfway, because it won't actually fix. In fact, it reinforces potentially the wrong thing. So I think it was really helpful as a reminder for that.
Yes, there is something called half-assing.
Yes, I was going to use that. I wasn't sure
Half-assing,
about using
yeah, totally
it.
fine. Half-assing your opposite action, which is not very effective. It's kind of like, okay, I'm, having anxiety, social anxiety. I want to like get better at showing up to parties, but then I show up to the party and I pretend to be the wallpaper. Like, I don't make any eye contact and I avoid all humans. And then it's like, okay, well, that's not quite opposite action.
That's right. So I really appreciate that reminder, because definitely, I'm sure myself and many others who are listening have found themselves in that position of like, I'll do it, but I'm not sure about it.
Really gonna do it. So, do you want to walk us through your home practice for opposite action?
I touched on it a little bit when I talked about how we're opposite action, and I want to bring it back up again. Anxiety is an overwhelm. It's not overwhelming, underlying theme of kind of what I've been going through, as I shared in the last couple of weeks, about kind of just where my life is right now, from both like definitely in the personal side of going through the divorce and navigating what a potential future may look like, and definitely being away from my son, who I used to see every day, has been anxiety. It's created anxiety for me. It's not that I'm worried that my wife can't take care of the son, but just I miss my kid, and it brings a level of anxiety and sadness and all those things. So what I focused on this week's home practice was the anxiety piece, because I overthink, and I really want to practice not doing that. And I think that's the big opposite action. The anxiety I'm feeling comes from a lot from just overthinking a situation or ruminating in that situation. Like I touched on before in previous weeks, I don't do well with uncertainty or things I don't think I can control. And when you're dealing with something as life changing as going through a divorce, someone you've been married for over 8 years, there's a lot you can't control in that situation. And for me, that does create a lot of anxiety. And so, like, going into the home exercise today, I think I scored around the 4 out of 5, because
Okay.
it does. It's just the underlying thing, and I'm not going to avoid feeling that way. I know that motion isn't grounded because it's a threat, but I do want to also acknowledge it's a genuine emotion grounded in a lot of just the situation that's around it, and just the feeling that I'm having in it. And so for me,
Yeah, for you, okay,
yeah,
so you've identified the emotion of anxiety, 4 out of
yeah,
10, right?
yeah.
Situation, I think I'm getting the situation in terms of prompting event, but what is the action urge for you associated with anxiety, right? So if we're trying to figure out what the opposite is, we need to know what our urge is.
Yeah, and I think once I'm feeling anxious, like I said, I start overthinking. I start just ruminating. It starts becoming a
Right.
very, yeah, I get stuck in the situation. And it just becomes non-productive anymore. And
Yeah.
if I'm dealing with someone in my personal life, if I'm dealing with that, and I'm trying to interact with the person who's giving me that anxiety, in the past it would have been my wife. It would be just, it could come out as like anger or shortness or just a level of just like, if you're causing this for me, I'm taking it out on you, even if it's not meant to be taken out on you, or you're not the real cause. Like, it's just that.
Mhm.
It's just kind of creating a situation that just is a negative feedback loop of just
Right.
like, I'm feeling anxious, it's making me feel a certain way. I'm attacking you for making me feel that way, even if you don't directly make me feel that way. And really wanting to focus, obviously, on the opposite of all of that, both in ruminating and kind of being stuck in that cycle of being just feeling anxious and overthinking, but also just my reaction to it when dealing with in interpersonal relationships.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, is this some acting on the emotion effective?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so the answer no, right? So then what for you, if you get clarity on what is opposite to rumination and then which makes sense, like sometimes when we're in our head and we're getting anxious, we do have that secondary emotion of like anger or frustration, which can then go out. So there's almost like two emotions happening at the same time. Like you got the anxiety, but then you also have maybe this irritability bleeding out toward the other
Yeah.
person. And so I'm
Yeah.
imagining potentially two opposite actions happening simultaneously because we need to go opposite to that irritability and anger, but then also opposite to the anxiety, right? Because anxiety for many people sometimes makes them want to avoid, right? Uh,
Right.
or in maybe your case, it might be um, to get intellectual and heady.
Yeah.
Right. So, which I think, I mean, I think for you're not alone in that. I think that there's lots of people who do that, like who go kind of in their head and kind of get intellectual and heady and ruminate and start trying to problem solve, even if it's not a solvable problem, and can get kind of spun up in which actually just adds to the anxiety, like the worst case scenarios, right, and kind of catastrophic thinking and all that we kind of identified last time.
Yeah.
So one opposite would be to get out of your head in your case, right?
Yeah.
So what do you imagine might be opposite to rumination and spinning in your mind?
Right. And I think for the home exercise, when I had focused more so on the tying in with the ruminating on it, was really, as I'm referring to my notes here, is just trying to maintain a calm tone, relaxed posture, just trying to just focus on, much like we did with the mindfulness when we began our session today, is that it's just how do I take my mind off of that, and finding some a mindfulness exercise. And I got back, I'm going calling back to several weeks ago when you asked me to put together a cheat sheet of like things I could do and skill stacking. This is an area where I'm like focused on, is it just listening to music, taking a walk, changing my temperature, ways that I can simply just get my mind to focus on, not necessarily just to distract myself, but really just realizing this is, I want to find the opposite way of just being stuck in a place and not being able to move forward or really get away from it, and just finding activities and things that put my mind in a different space, put my mind in somewhere else. And I think a tangential effect of that touches on that next part where I'm like talking about the anger or frustration or how I vent, is then like if my mind's off of that, then my hopes are, not my hopes, but what will happen then is that I'm going to act opposite on the lashing out to a loved one or to someone in my space who I may be perceiving to cause that anxiety for me, because it is paired hand in hand. I'm stuck here. I feel stuck and I need a vent and I need to get it out and I need to just do
Right.
something. If I don't feel stuck anymore, then that other emotion comes down and I no longer feel the need to like have
Yeah.
to vent or lash out.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think with anger, the action urge for many is to attack, right? When we're angry, And so opposite action to attacking might be gently avoiding, right? Or to put the two together, it may be excusing yourself in a way from the interaction so that you can go do something to bring down your internal anxieties and be more effective, right? So I can imagine a scenario where like actually pausing the conversation or stepping away and distracting or self-soothe or like getting yourself into your body and being more present and out of your head would be kind of doing both, right? It's kind of like
Right.
getting away from the attacking situation or the potential to attack while also taking care of and reducing that anxiety internally.
Yeah, and I think that's a big part, and I think that's one thing I'm not always good at is even just walking away from the conversation that may be causing me anxiety because, like I said, I'm stuck there and I'm ruminating. I'm trying to resolve it, and not saying problems, trying to jump ahead to problem solving, and when I haven't had a chance to check the facts and to determine, like to your point earlier, like is this emotionally a good idea to do this versus not? And I think now having learning the skill set or especially around opposite action, I think will be a key for me,
Yeah.
and being able to now step through it a little bit more sequentially and in a much more organized way, where I'm like, I'm not just jumping ahead to try to solve something when it may not even been the best action to do that.
Right. I am curious, and this might I'll admit I didn't look at your home practices before a meeting, so I'm learning with the rest of the people who are listening. So we're learning about this all together, which is great. I am curious if the anxiety you're feeling, right? If we go back to checking the facts, does the anxiety fit the facts in this situation?
That's a really good question, and I think I when I think about past places where I feel like a lot of anxiety, even today, I felt a lot of anxiety going through a mediation session with my wife to discuss kind of settlement terms for our divorce, and I'm just thinking through like how I felt anxious in certain parts of it, and I would say in certain times, like I some of that anxiousness comes from how I'm being perceived or how I'm being talked about in a negative way, or how it feels like we're talking across one another, and the anxiousness of just kind of what the situation puts me in, and from a financial perspective, from a parental perspective, and all those things. And I think for me, I would say sometimes it does, and sometimes it doesn't. And to your point earlier, even if it did fit the facts, I still want the opposite action because I know, regardless of whether or not it fits the facts or not, for me personally, and I can only speak for myself personally, I know the emotion I'm feeling doesn't lead to a positive outcome, even if it's there. And I don't know if problem solving, and it could be a pairing, and I think that was a nice part of the flow chart that was there. You can pair them both, what it looks like, and please let me know if I'm wrong, but my understanding was there is a pathway of going, you could do opposite action and problem solve at the same time. And I think for me, I tend to just go right to problem solving without having to just take myself back and to change the way I'm feeling before, and making it a much more productive space for to do that versus just jumping in with the anger and everything and trying to solve what I'm feeling in the moment.
Right. Well, that's why I was wondering, like, is there something that actually could be solved here that could also reduce the anxiety, right? Because going back to the fact that anxiety makes us typically, for many, want to avoid, like, is there something, though, that needs to be dealt with that actually could alleviate some of the worries or concerns or fears? And I mean, part of what you're saying, like, I can imagine once, even though the process of going for mediation and like getting these terms, I can imagine being incredibly stressful and like there's a lot of unknowns, but once it all gets settled, maybe there'll be less anxiety, possibly.
No, there is, and I think
Yeah.
the big picture is where I'm at. But like in the moment, trying to resolve the micro situations, I think yes, there's definitely ways to problem solve it. But I think what happens is my anxiety is starting to show, the emotions not necessarily rise, and never, it wasn't discord, but what is triggering is simply if I'm feeling concern and anxiousness, I think my wife feels it as well, and then she gets her emotions rise, and I think that just leads to, and what has been, or I would say in our marriage has been this dysfunction of communication has been it's not necessarily we're initially just starting off screaming at one another, but when either one of us are feeling anxious, I think it definitely shows, even if it's just in our face or just a slight uptone. And I think what happens is I feel a little anxious, she's immediately on the defensive, and her voice is rising, then my voice rises, and not like today, but it just ends up being a situation where even if we're saying the right words to solve the problem, I think neither one of us hears it.
Yeah.
Because we're already emotionally in a headspace that isn't receptive to even rational speech. And I think for me, what I can say is that's where I would say opposite action would be very important for me. And I can only speak for myself here, is I feel like if I can modulate and speak like in the voice I'm speaking right now, or speak in a calm tone, hopefully what I'm saying, the words I'm trying to say, or the actions I'm trying to propose or take while trying to problem solve will be more receptive. And I think that's also been a struggle for me, and why I want to dig into problem solving is more so in my interpersonal relationships, is like, even I believe I am proposing a very rational way of solving a problem. What happens if it's not receptive to someone, or it doesn't actually solve the problem, even if it's like it is truly best being relative, best action, or the best way to de-escalate a situation that other person or persons are not willing to hear it, not receptive to it? What do you do? Because now you're in a situation where it's like, I'm stepping through all the steps, I'm stepping through the skills I'm supposed to step through, and I'm not resolving this. And so for me, I want to dig in a little bit more today about what happens when that is the case. And I think that I had found myself in the past in that situation where it's like, what do I do now? Because I'm now like really stuck.
Right. Yes. And we don't have control over other people, right? We can only
Yeah.
control ourselves, and that makes it really challenging, especially when we're trying to problem solve with another person and they're not on board with our problem solving, or not in agreement. I do think this is when going back to the skill stacking, where so many of the other skills are so important, like radical acceptance and distress tolerance. And being able to negotiate, right? Like sometimes it is a negotiation, especially the scenario you're talking about. It's like, okay, well, how can we find the middle path between what you're wanting and what I'm wanting, right? To get to an actual a situation where we're both agreeing to the problem solving.
Right.
To go back to what you were saying, I agree with you that if we are in an emotional state, like we can't problem solve from emotion mind. It is a very rational, reasonable mind activity. And so, yes, if emotions are high, we probably want to do some skills to bring down the emotional temperature before we even engage in problem solving. Because part of problem solving, and I'll go back to a little bit of teaching just for a moment for our listeners, the concept of problem solving is when, the emotion fits the fact and the situation itself is the problem, we may want to consider, okay, well, how do I change this situation, or what do I do so that this emotion doesn't keep getting triggered, right? Because this isn't working, like something's not working and I need to solve something. And part of problem solving is to brainstorm all kinds of possible solutions. And I actually recommend don't write off any solution right away. Just throw them all out there, even if they sound off the wall and crazy and you're not going to do them. Just throw them all out there to kind of get your brain thinking creatively. And then after you have a whole bunch of possible solutions, really looking at them, crossing off the ones that are, not realistic, and getting down to the ones that could possibly work. And if you're stuck between them, you can even do pros and cons on one or two of the answers you come up with, and then hopefully getting to one where you're like, okay, I'm going to try this one, and then taking a first action step, see how it works. And if that doesn't work, then you can go back to your other potential solution and try something else out. So that's kind of problem solving in a nutshell. What did you do for problem solving?
I think for me, it kind of ties back into the a situation in the moment where I feel a strong emotional reaction during a conversation. So I think for me, I think there's just a common theme when it comes to things with me, whether it's opposite action or problem solving. I'm in a situation, and in this case, it would be an emotional feeling that is feeling justified. Like, this person makes me feel angry because the actions they're doing is creating anger within me and creating anger. I don't need to justify. Creates anger with me, and I think that's also a huge thing for me. Like sometimes I am trying to check a lot. I think in my life, am I trying to feel angry because it is the right emotion or not? And I think in times there's always been, I think anger for me especially, is it justified anger? Am I really feeling angry? And there are definitely times where I'm like, yes. It is most definitely justified that I feel this way. And I think the problem I face here is this. It's like, especially with anger versus many of the other emotions, like if I'm feeling sad or I'm feeling anything else, I do find that I'm more productive in this. And while I didn't know the actual terminology or problem solving, I did find myself doing some of those similar steps of trying to come up with solutions and trying to resolve it. I just realized with anger, there is just no way to deal with that piece of it. It's just like I'm already getting to my emotional mind. I'm already there, and I'm already just shooting from the hip, firing from all cylinders. And what I want to be able to do is really, when I am angry and it is emotionally justified, how do I still resolve it in a way that is more productive and try to solve the problem that is causing that anger? Even if it's like, and it's probably not true, like even if I'm not the reason that causes the problem, but I am feeling angry from the problem, how do I go in and be a productive partner, whether it's in a relationship or in a friendship or in a work setting, and turn this into something where I'm not just firing from emotional mind, I'm in my wise mind, and I'm able to be productive and solve the problem and make this where anger doesn't get the best of me, I guess is the best way to put it.
Okay. So are we identifying the problem as anger, like letting anger control your reaction?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's good, and I'm glad you're bringing this up, because getting clear on like what is it we're trying to solve for, right? If we're trying to solve for anger kind of taking over and becoming ineffective because the anger had taken over, then we're really trying to come up with potential strategies for reducing anger in the moment, right? That could be part of our brainstorm. So as I'm imagining, some of the possible solution could be like, okay, noticing my body is getting angry, like noticing the rise in temperature, and then trying to do a distress tolerance skill, right? Like that could be one possible solution. And then maybe I'd pick a stop skill followed by a tip, right? Or maybe I'd pick, distract. So part of your brainstorm, and I don't know where you landed on your brainstorm, but I'm imagining like some of the brainstorm being skills, right? Like skills that you could use in the moment when you start to feel angry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think for me, as I'm looking at my notes here, I think for me, I came up with a couple, like at least 6 different solutions to potentially
I'd love
de-escalate it.
Yeah.
I think for me, it's first just noticing the emotion
Yeah.
and the urge to react. And for me, it's like that's number one thing with me in anger. It's just like I just want to react in the moment. I'm just living in it. I'm just riding that in a bad way, like riding that wave in a really bad way, and just reacting in a negative. And I think for me, then it's the other solution is then pause and take a slow breath. Like again, trying to pair the skill sets of like the stop, like just like
Skill.
stop skill. Like I just all right. And to remind myself again to focus on the facts rather than the assumptions. Like I said, sometimes when I go into this space, when I'm especially feeling anger, maybe the facts are justifying it, and sometimes maybe it is that I'm overthinking it, or I'm making an assumption that's not there, or I perceive it is I'm being wronged in a way that I'm not being wronged. But reminding myself to just do it again, check the facts again, just gonna go, is it really? Is this really what's going on, or am I really making an assumption here? And then I think this one's going to be harder for me. Choose a calm tone and relaxed body. I think when I'm already in that anger state, and again, this comes back to some of that opposite action piece of just like, how do I just feel differently than where I am right now? Like, yes, anger's there. It may be valid. It may be a valid feeling to have. It may fit the facts and emotion, but it still doesn't mean I should be this way. And calming down. And I think with that is then, depending on the situation of why I'm feeling angry, is responding thoughtfully and asking clarifying questions. And again, I think that goes back to, am I assuming something or am I believing that it's fact? And sometimes when I'm confused by that, I tend to lean on, it's not an assumption, Ed, it's really true. And really this solution was reminding me that I should clarify. I should ask follow-up questions. I should be like, what's going on? And depending on the situation, again, I apologize for not having one specific, but like just what's going on and validating, like, is this really what's happening? Am I perceiving the events that are happening in front of me that's causing me anger in a factual way or an emotion or in an assumption way? And I think for me, the last but not least, is staying present and trying to continue especially with the conversation in a constructive way. I think, especially with me and anger, and I think even some of the listeners listening out there, like when you get angry, you're in a different headspace entirely. You're not focused in the moment. You're firing, you're reacting. I'm shooting from all cylinders, and it's just like, and I'm not there anymore. I'm totally a different space, and it's like, if I'm in the moment and I'm present and I can focus on what's right in front of me and hopefully, like I said, especially if it's a conversation that's meant to problem solve, like I can focus and be constructive, I think that would be incredibly helpful for me. And then that's just really acknowledging for myself my limitations when I'm feeling anger. It's just like keeping myself present, keeping myself calm, and really making sure I'm not just saying things, even though I'm trying to be constructive, that is based on assumptions versus facts.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, wonderful brainstorm. I'm loving all of them because I can imagine potentially all of them being useful. When you look at that list, so this is one of the ways we can evaluate which solution we want to use. It's partly looking at it by like, okay, what's actually going to be most effective? Like, some of them, like, do I think some of them are a little too pie in the sky in my ability to get to and do in the moment? Or do they feel like realistically, which ones do I imagine myself being able to do? And which ones are going to actually, like, if I, again, going back to what am I trying to solve for? I'm trying to solve for me reacting from a place of anger, which has the best, potential to actually prevent me from reacting from anger. Yeah.
I think that's a great question. And I think that realistically, I think it's the first two I mentioned. I think for me, when I'm angry, I sometimes don't even realize I'm angry. I think when I've had partners in my life who then go, Ed, you're angry. I'm like, no, I'm not. Like, wait, maybe I am.
Pause and think about that.
So I think for me, as a reminder, that first one was notice the emotion. And I think, and then the urge to react. I think it pairs well because, like, if I'm not even, if I don't even realize I'm in that space and I'm already reacting, it's just like taking a pause and going, yes, I am angry. And I think that then pairs well with the second one is that should pause and take a deep breath. I think those are realistic in the moment, regardless. And also they're the most constructive for me. I'm not saying the rest of them are truly pie in the sky. I think when I came up with solutions for this, I'm also trying to figure out what would be the very best ways for me to do it. And really for me, realistically, is I might not be able to have the capacity to do some of these right now, but my hopes are as we go through DBT and I learn more in this module and continue on my DBT journey is to be able to do these other solutions, because as I look at my list right now, apologies as I'm looking over here, is those are all things that I don't think aren't so inconceivable for someone to do, especially myself. But what I will honestly admit to, and I think what you're pointing out is, in the moment, can I do it right now? The answer is no. I probably couldn't do some of these in the moment. I really couldn't get my head to that place. But if I could, and I should be, and I think we use the word should, and I know that's not always the best term, especially with DBT.
On the should, but yes.
It shouldn't. But what I'm trying to say is really just, I would love to be able to have the capacity and skills to do all 6 of these. And it could be like in pairing, like I said, 1 and 2, literally and figuratively, or just like these are all solutions that I feel would resolve and solve the problem. The problem is simply, and again, that's the big part of why I'm continuing with DBT and really enjoy these one-on-one sessions is really, hey, I do need the coaching. Even if I know the skill, how do I apply it in real-world situations in the moment?
Well, and Edward, you can 100% get there. I know that you can do those more advanced ones, and you will, and they will become second nature. I have no doubt. I have full faith in your...
I really appreciate that.
Yeah, I do. And I know you can. And I'm really glad that you're being, honest with yourself of where you are right now, right? Because I think sometimes people who are taking DBT actually can get like a little bit down on themselves or frustrated if they think that they should be able to check the facts in the moment when they're feeling really overwhelmed and feeling all these intense emotions, or be able to challenge an interpretation when they're emotionally flooded. And it's like, no, actually, when you're feeling big emotions, if you can just notice that you're feeling big emotions, yay, like that is a step, to just be like, whoa, I'm overwhelmed, or whoa, I'm feeling angry, or oh, this is anger, right? Because if we can name it, we can tame it. And so, yes, like, I agree with you, like setting the expectation of like, okay, right now I'm just going to be able to observe, name, and then re-regulate. Like those are the goals right now. Just observe it, name it, like bring it down. And then once we can get there, then we can start bringing in those other more complex skills that require our prefrontal cortex to be back online to be able to think, right? I sometimes use this analogy, I may have already used it before, of like starting in the shallow end when we're learning to swim, and I think for you, like if you wanted to, once you're out of the situation, going back and thinking about it and having those challenging interpretations and those other like thought to kind of practice it, like when you're not in the heat of the moment, because then you're right, it's going to become more second nature when you are in the moment to be able to check the facts, and kind of look at like, ooh, am I making an assumption? Am I making a judgment? When you start, I mean, that's partly why the home practices are good, because we can reflect back on a situation and be like, oh, that was a judgment, that was an assumption, right? And start kind of building that muscle memory.
Right. Yeah, and I think I what I've learning from DBT in general is knowing where my limits are. I think before I began DBT, where my mind would went is really just like, I'm not perfect. Why am I not being able to do these things? And what I'm learning, even with these skills, and as we talked about, like thinking about solutions, and just even going through the other modules I've been so far, is just understanding there are limitations to this, and there are limitations in acknowledging what those are, and really just being able to understand that it's also a journey as well. Like it isn't just simply I learned the skill, I can apply it immediately, and it's going to work well for me. And it's just like I think for me as I'm learning DBT, and whether it's skills I've known in the past and refining or new skills, it's just for me that's part of that large part. And I think part of this exercise when we talk about solving for this particular problem is just like I realize I'm pulling in a lot of that, understanding where my limitation is, and being able to just, to your point, be okay with, hey, if I can just identify it and de-escalate it, that is a huge first step for me.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And have you, okay, so we've come up with the possible solution. Did you wind up doing a pros and cons on the solution for this home practice? I can't remember if that was part of this one.
I'm trying to remember if I did. I don't know. Remember if I did or didn't on this one, but I can walk through it right now on the pros and cons
Yeah, I
of
mean,
this.
sure. Or, I mean, even maybe more importantly for our readers might be, or listeners might be interested in, is to think about, did you identify a first action step and try it out yet? Like, have you had an experience of testing this out?
I have. I definitely have, and I think even today, I think as we talked a little bit about doing the mediation day, definitely there are moments where I felt angry, and not to get into details, I'm not trying to get too far down the road, but definitely. And I think for me in that moment, I was able to just name that emotion, and obviously in my head, I wasn't going to go, oh, but I was able to name it. And what I then noticed, and what I noticed for myself and saw was that taking that deep breath, I noticed that even just during my mediation call, just closing my eyes and going. And I realized how more productive I was in in having that conversation, because in the past, if I wasn't able to identify the emotion or even just take the step of pausing, taking a breath, my voice would have risen. I would have immediately gone into defense mode. And it would have been a very unproductive conversation. Period. It would have just been an actual fight, which is what it's been in the past. And I found just even. Yeah, did it fully solve the problem? No. Did I still feel underlying feelings of anger? Did I still have some of the physical manifestations of anger? Sure, and I'm sure it showed up a little bit in my tone. My chest felt a little tighter. My voice might have been a little bit sharper. I might have had some physical reactions like this, but
Right.
it didn't get to a destructive place where it's like,
Yeah, like saying something in anger, or adding to the fuel fire.
yeah,
Like,
yeah, and going down that pathway, even if my wife in that situation did raise her voice, I usually then escalate, and like just having that moment, I noticed that also helped de-escalate the situation, and maybe her initial feelings were that was feeling as well, and that's something which was much more a productive thing, that even if her emotions rose, it de-escalated quickly if I'm not trying to meet her at her level.
that sounds like a success to me. Yeah. Did you give yourself credit for that? Like,
I think after it was all said and done today, I kind of had a moment where I'm like, I'm emotionally exhausted, but at the same time, like, I think that's a lot better than it could be, and definitely I felt like it was much more something that was more productive than what it would have been in the past before learning these skills, where it would have been like we're just even if an actual baby theater would have been just like us screaming at one another, and knowing that, like, look, and to your point, the big picture is resolving this, getting to that settlement, getting to moving to the next phase of my life, which I'm excited for. There's a lot of positives in my next phase of my life here, and a lot to look forward to. Is I can't let the moment in these micro moments, and and also, like I said, that the feeling angry today was it based in facts? Yeah, there were real facts there of why I felt angry in the moment, but it didn't mean but it wasn't emotionally good idea to react to them. And so I think that was just I found it amazing in the moment. I'm like, wait, I get I just learned the skill a couple days ago. I get to right now in this moment. And again, like I said, for those watching and listening to this podcast, I wasn't perfect in it. Like I said, I still felt a little bit of anger, but at least the outcome was a much more productive moment than what it could have been. And knowing that even coming out, that's a success. 80% is better than 0%. And I think my hopes are over time.
That tied back to your SMART goal, right? I mean, we're not aiming for perfection. You're human. No. Right? But if we can say that the majority of the time you're being effective and not reacting from the anger place, right? That is a success. That's a win for sure. And giving yourself credit for that. I think that's so important. Okay, so we've talked about opposite action and problem solving. Mainly talked about opposite action to anxiety and anger. You did mention sadness, which is an interesting one. So maybe we'll circle back to that emotion just to kind of explore what is the emotion urge that comes up with sadness.
Sure, that's a really good question. I actually kind of dovetail into a question I have about opposite action, but I can go into a little bit kind of what causes sadness for me, or what are the actions that cause sadness for me. And I think a lot of times it's situational. I think for me especially, and this is where it gets difficult when I think about my son, for example, and how I'm not there with him right now, and obviously the opposite actions be there with him, but obviously with the circumstances in my life right now, you can't do that. I can't just show up and be in his life. And that's what I want. And you can see my son glaze over as I'm talking about him right now. So I apologize, listeners. And
time with him, you want to be with him, and there's a sadness there for sure.
Yeah, there is. And as someone who was the primary, and again, not to dispel what my wife did and his mom did, but like as the primary caregiver, it's difficult for me to go from primary caregiver to not involved in his life, and things like that draw a lot of sadness for me, as you can tell. And and I know the
let me pause you because I just wanted you to take a breath, because I think that, I mean, this is one where emotion fit the facts. There is a loss there. And so I think it's important for, sometimes, especially with these skills, we're thinking about like, how do we change an emotion? And yet with sadness, especially for a situation like this, it makes sense. It's an appropriate response to feel loss and grief when we go from like seeing our son every day to now having a custody arrangement and missing him. And so, I do think this is where mindfulness to emotion comes in, which is a later skill in emotion regulation, where giving ourselves permission to feel those feelings and let them be a wave. Just like grieving, where we have to kind of radically accept. And it sounds like you're in a situation where hopefully you'll be getting more time soon, or hopefully I'm fingers crossing, right? But there's also, it's not going to be the same. There is a grief that it's never going to be the 100% that it was before.
Yeah, and that's where that's when it comes from. It's like, I want it to be 100%, and even in the best circumstances, without getting into details of logistics of going through something like this, no parent will get 100% in anything, even if every parents, in this case especially, we're both good parents. There's no harm. Like, it's just that, and I think that's where my question lies. And like, I do, like, in cases where, and I know this example may not be a perfect example for opposite action, but really in a more general way, especially when it comes to sadness, there are these times where I'm like, there are these actions that make me really, really sad, and how, and I do want to, I guess act opposite may not be the right word, but how can opposite action be applied in some cases where the opposite action may not be literally the opposite action? Like, in theory, if I was still in my marriage, sure, if I miss my son, go see my son. It's an easy way to solve it. But in circumstances not necessarily tied to this, but like when the opposite action isn't feasible, even if it is going to make the action not cause the emotion, what can you do in those circumstances?
Yeah. So if opposite action, like it in this situation fit the fact, but it may not be effective. Like for many people, sadness causes us to withdraw, right? So when we feel sad, we can often withdraw. We might go internal, right? We may become less active, right? We kind of, because if we want to protect ourselves, right? We kind of like pull in. And so there could be situations where maybe it's just not the right time to feel the grief and like feel the sadness. I'm at work, I'm trying to do things, right? So opposite action to sadness is to get active, right? So when you think about like opposite action to depression, actually, as a whole, like the best treatment for depression, even though it's really, really hard, is behavioral activation, right? So depression makes us want to curl in bed and do nothing, and like we have no energy and we're drained. But the opposite action to that is to go do things, be around people, get busy, and throw yourself into an activity. So that is kind of similarly an opposite action to sadness is to connect. You know, it may not be with your son if he's not available, but connect with other people, connect with your support, connect with colleagues, throw yourself into a work project, go for a run, like do something active.
And I think that's a great reminder because for me, I think that's where I got stuck a little bit with opposite action is finding the literal opposite action things. And if you look at it as a wheel, like I'm here, how do I get over here? And I think to your point, as I'm learning in the real time here, everyone is like you're right. What I'm feeling right now when it comes to this emotion of sadness and the action is like I miss my son. Is I miss a connection. I'm missing that, whether it's not togetherness, but I apologize, it's just like community or things like that. And if I can just bridge that, even if it's like go hang out with a friend, go out, like I said, throw myself into work a little, just try to create a situation where it's like I do feel a sense of attachment to something that will hopefully alleviate the sadness. And also in some ways, even if it's not a literal opposite of what I can be doing, it is still an opposite of the overall underlying reason of why I'm feeling that way, and that will help make that feel better. And I think that's, for me, becomes the opposite action, is I'm putting this together in real time, and I'm happy to have this moment with you, is like, you're right, it isn't just necessarily the literal situation, it's the, what is that literal situation, what's going on in this case, it's abandonment, or it's not feeling alone, connection. Or whatever it is, and connection, and if I can find the opposite of that, that would be incredibly helpful.
Right, good. I'm looking forward to hearing, what you wind up doing for those moments, to be able to find, some community and connection and to throw yourself into things and how that feels for you.
I think for me, without realizing I'm doing it, and I can only speak, is that I have been more cognizant of connections, whether it's like being present in moments, enjoying engagement with people. Like to your point, sometimes I think for me, I get really withdrawn and I stop communicating or stop having productive conversations or feeling love or feeling anything in the circumstances.
And that winds up compounding, right? I mean, the more we would
right.
less, the more detached, the more disconnected, the more lonely, like it can, like, even though the instinct is to withdraw when we feel sad, it can actually make it worse.
Yeah, and I realized for me, unintentionally, I think someone pointed it out to me a couple of days ago. Hey, you've let some walls down about something, and now you're able to do something that you weren't able to do before. And I was like, you're right. Yeah. I have done that. And again, this is before learning abstraction, but I realized I'm just in that moment. And I had this immense love for this person for pointing it out to me, because I'm like, you're right. This was something that was a friction point for us, that like I wasn't fully present in this moment that you needed me to be in this moment with you, and it was creating a lot of negative emotion there, but now I'm able to be present in this way for you, or be with you in that moment. And again, all of a sudden it's like, oh, right. It is. And again, it hadn't taken away from the sadness pieces per se, but I'm realizing, like, yeah, that was very helpful to not just simply be constantly withdrawn or just be in my own head or to be whatever. And I find myself naturally doing that as well. And it's helpful now to have the right language. I'm going to use the word language, or ways to then codify what am I actually doing. It's really in some ways unintentionally, not unintentionally, but like realizing I've been doing opposite action, but now I'm much more equipped because I know the actual skill now, and being able to apply it in a much more consistent way, and being able to talk about it. And I'm like, oh, and that was what I felt going through this module this week, was like, oh,
Yeah, it's insight.
Oh.
Yeah, you have some insight about it now. Now you can do it intentionally as opposed to like.
Yeah, and for me, I'm like, oh, right. And once I'm on the opposite of it, how I'm in the moment with this person is better than it was in the past. Yes.
That's wonderful. I love hearing that. So thank you for sharing.
Absolutely.
Good. Well, I'm looking forward to continuing our conversation next week. So thank you for sharing.
Absolutely.
Good. Well, I'm looking forward to continuing our conversation next week. I will look forward. We will be doing week 4 of emotion regulation for those of you joining us. So amazing. Stay tuned for week 4 of emotion regulation.
Thanks for listening to Thriving with DBT. These conversations are here to help you see what practice looks like in real life and to remind you that progress is built on small, imperfect steps over time. If you'd like to learn more about DBT skills programs and coaching, you can find us at therahive.com, and we'd love to hear any feedback you have about this show. Speaking of, if this show was helpful, subscribing and sharing it with someone you care about helps more people discover DBT and these life-changing skills. And if you're feeling particularly generous, a positive review makes the biggest impact for us. Thanks again, and stay tuned for our next episode.